Mark Carney claimed on the campaign trail that he was going to unite the country. He further claimed that there would be infrastructure projects that he was going to be greenlighting. To show how much he wanted to unify the country and make pipelines, he selected Stephen Guilbeault to not only be the guy that is going to make the legislation to censor the internet, but also the guy that's trying to get in the way of pipelines. Welcome to the Canadian Shield. My name is Sterling. I'm your host. We all remember when Mark Carney had to make the announcement, and to appease Stephen Guilbeault, he told him that he would give him some of the jacket in the cabinet. Now, everybody who read Mark Carney's book Values knew that he was flat out lying about infrastructure projects. We tried to tell you, but you didn't care because you told yourself that you were voting against Donald Trump, a man who is making so much oil right now that the entire world is just sucking it up with a sponge. However, not only is Stephen Guilbeault getting to run interference on pipelines and the economic prosperity of most of the Canadian country, at least 42% of the country wanted these things. Further, 42% also wanted a free and open airwaves in this country. We want free and open internet and free and open censorship, which is well close enough to 50% to tell yourself that you don't have the mandate to dictate to the rest of the country how it's going to work. Censorship is a line in the sand for me. I don't have any patience for it. I find that anybody who can't hear words they don't agree with to be the weakest form of character that there is. I don't care. If it's not a lie, then there's not a thing that you should be trying to do to stop it. And the fact that I'm saying something that I know to be true, and you need me to be silenced, speaks about you, not about me. It's your character that's in the way. It's your weakness that's in the way. And you need to go see somebody, a therapist, and work it all out. Because the idea that I should be silent for your feelings, even though I know it to be true, is not something that most people from the Generation X will tolerate. I get it. You're all out there trying to tell yourself that, well, it's only going to be specific things. No, it's a slippery slope. And once you start, you never stop. And that's how we end up in places like Iraq, where, people get disappeared for saying something against the government. Is that what you want to be? Is that the country you're looking to build? You're looking to build a dictatorship, a communist dictatorship where people are put into concentration camps? Is that the idea? Is that the country you're searching for? Well, I suppose we'll have time to get into that because Stephen Guilbeault is high on his horse about talking about pipelines. And the one thing that really gets under my skin about people like Stephen Guilbeault and Sean Fraser is they know they're not being honest, but they say it anyway. And to me, that level of dishonesty is not a good look for a leader, not a good look for a Canadian politician. Certainly not a good look for a person who is given the ability to make decisions that impact all of the country based only on their very narrow aspect and not true. There's no truth to their very, very narrow aspects. So now what we're actually looking at is them just deciding that they know what's best and the rest of us do not. And they will lie to make sure that nobody calls them out on it. This is not the kind of caliber or the kind of character that in any way, shape, or form can be deemed honorable. And it's certainly not somebody who should be given reins of leadership and be put in charge of absolutely anything. Stephen Guilbeault's opened up just fine talking about the pipelines, and then he decided to try and convince the Canadian population that nobody sees nobody sees a desire for a new pipeline, and most of the world thinks that there will be no demand for oil. Seems that Mr. Guilbeault is either completely 100% uninformed and therefore should not be able to give an opinion on the matter, or he knows that he's not being honest and therefore should not be permitted to give an opinion on the matter. Before we get into the gaslighting that Stephen Guilbeault tries to bring to the Canadian population, ironically, Guilbeault the gaslighter is the guy that wants no fossil fuels. I'll start with an article that I picked up from the National Post. Now, Guilbeault has said a whole host of things, but we have his own words, and I'm going to rip them to shreds if I'm honest with you. Let's just listen to the couple things from this article. Guilbeault throws cold water on new pipeline, says we have enough already. Oh, excuse me, mister. But 43% of the country elected for, they voted for free and open airwaves, and they want the oil to flow. This isn't 1 or 2% down in the fringes, as you'd like to say. This is nearly half the country, and it grows every day because they see now, they know there is a lot of people that voted for the Liberals who are regretting casting their vote with them. Ottawa. Minister of Canadian Identity Stephen Guilbeault said Wednesday that Ottawa's stalled progress on oil and gas pipelines isn't a threat to national unity because demand for pipelines is petering out on its own. Well, it seems to me that we can check that. And now I'll leave a link to this article. You can go and finish the rest of it. I think that right out of the gate, it says enough about the opinion and the attitude of Stephen Guilbeault. But we have his own words.
Prime Minister last night on TV seemed to open the door to potentially changing the emissions cap or the IAA to get projects built. What do you think of what he said?
Well, these are important conversations that we will need to have in the coming weeks.
Well, here we go again. You are asked the question right now. Why are you trying to stall and avoid and ignore? Here we are again in liberal mantra or motto of never talk about it right now, and then when it is time to talk about it, lie and avoid and never talk about it then either. It's not the last election. This time Canadians are paying attention. 70% of the country came out, Mr. Guilbeault. We're watching. We're looking. You made a promise, all of your party, to tie the country together with infrastructure projects.
Premier Smith is saying that you're anti-pipeline still. What do you say in response to her concerns just about broadly about the cabinet? And how do you deal with national unity? How do you address that right now?
So on pipelines, people should remember that we bought a pipeline, Trans Mountain, and that is only used right now about 40% capacity. So I think before we start talking about building an entire new pipeline, maybe we should maximize the use of existing infrastructure.
First of all, let me say right out of the gate, you don't limit your infrastructure. You continue it. We only have a very small section of the country covered by this infrastructure. We need more. That's why we're talking about it. We have other areas and regions that we could be sending this product to. Why would we limit ourselves? Why would we do that, Mr. Guilbeault? Because you climbed the CN Tower? That doesn't seem to make you qualified to understand the economics of the globe. Now, the other many problems I have with what this guy just had to say. Let's take a look at this Google AI, where it says that Guilbeault said on Wednesday the Trans Mountain Pipeline is being used at 40% capacity, but the company reported last year it was using more than 75%. Okay, so you're wrong about that, right? You're half as wrong, right? I mean, 75 from 40, let's call that pretty wrong. Then we have this other Google AI, which I found to be quite interesting. In 2022, the average monthly utilization rate for Trans Mountain Pipeline was 99%, and it was operating at full capacity. In 2023, the Trans Mountain Pipeline continued to operate at full capacity, transporting an annual average of 346 million barrels a day. That's what B/D means. The four major crude oil pipelines that carry oil out of Canada's Western Canadian Sedimentary Basin, Enbridge, Mainline, Keystone, Trans Mountain, and Express, combined make up 96% of all the crude capacity exiting from this particular basin. In 2023, the total pipeline design capacity moved oil from the basin to outside markets was 745.3 thousand cubic meters a day, every single day. Now you can continue to read down. You can see that the Trans Mountain Pipeline is at a capacity, it has increased by 7.3%. Enbridge, Mainland, Keystone, and Trans Mountain are all running at near 100% utilization. The Line 3 replacement program on the Enbridge Mainline increased capacity by a total of 370,000 barrels a day. Keystone Pipeline is operating at high utilization rates. Express Pipeline is also running at high utilization rates, with a 99% utilization rate being used for calculations. Now, that is pretty bad, right? To think that this guy who's supposed to be in charge of this doesn't understand that the capacity is twice what he believes it to be, and that four of them combined are nearly at 100%, 99% capacity. And so we are now looking at, we're going to dredge one of these passageways so that we can put more oil into the ships that are sailing to, as it turns out, China. That's right, you heard me correctly. We ship it to China. There's a Google AI. Canada shipped about 207,000 barrels per day on average to China since the Trans Mountain expansion ramped up to full operations in June last year. Ship tracking data on the Kepler showed This was a huge increase from the average of about 7,000 barrels per day in the decade of 2023. Now, they're trying to say it's all about the trade war, but that's actually not true because it's been happening since June of last year. This is just the way that the Liberal government likes to do business. They have no problem doing business with despots. They have no problem doing business with tyrants. They have no other person to sell it to on that coast. And because we don't have any pipelines going to Europe, because we don't have any way to get the product to another market, we are forced to sell it to the communists who are not using it to make electrical generation. They're using it for their war machine. And this is not a really good look when you consider that China is in bed with Russia. So technically, we're selling the oil to the enemy of Ukraine at 200,000 barrels a day, which they are using to do all kinds of things in their military. This is the Liberal government, folks. Oh, I know you didn't want to vote for Trump, but apparently you had no problem at all voting for Xi Jinping.
And the Canadian Energy Regulator, as well as the International Energy Agency, are telling us that probably by 2028, 2029, demand for oil will peak globally, and it will also peak in Canada. So as far as I know, there are no investors right now. There are no companies that are saying that they want to build an east-west pipeline. And as you know, these things are built by companies, not governments.
I want to apologize right now, just in case I get a little fired up, because that guy spoke for 25 seconds, and everything out of his mouth was a complete, either a lie or it was incorrect. And if it was a lie, then he should not be permitted to walk the halls of Parliament. And if it was incorrect, then he should do the research before he opens his mouth. I mean, it's better to look the fool than to open your mouth and remove all doubt. Is that not the expression that we hear? This is a serious thing. Canadians' lives are at risk, people's future, the economy, and it's all being bottlenecked by some fanatic who believes that he understands how the world should live while he gets in his chauffeur-driven car. This is not the kind of person who should be at the helm of either oil or the censorship. However, somebody voted for this guy, and I guess that's how he got a spot back in the House of Commons. And I want to talk about all of the things that he said wrong in that statement he opened up with by saying that all of these energy regulators are trying to convince you that there's no demand for oil coming. He doesn't believe that there's any idea or any desire for investment coming. And we don't build these things because we're a government. We're not a private industry. Before I talk about the demand for supply, let's just see if anybody's investing in pipelines. Well, out of the CBC, it appears that Enbridge is selling stake of West Coast Pipeline to First Nations group. It's kind of weird that a First Nations company would group would buy access to a pipeline for that the demand is going down on. Stonelask 8 Indigenous Alliance Limited Partnership invested $715 million for a 12% share. For more than 65 years, Enbridge Inc.'s West Coast Pipeline has been pumping natural gas through the First Nations territories across British Columbia. Under a deal announced Thursday, 36 of those communities are set to see long-term financial benefits from the 2,900-kilometer system that stretches from BC's far northeast to the Canadian-U.S. border. People often ask what's the economic reconciliation for the Indigenous people looks like, says Chief Dave Jimmy, president of the chair of that group, which represents 36 BC nations. I'll leave a link to the article. I think that we can see that they had $715 million to invest. So clearly they're getting a cut of something. And now they've just bought 12% outright. They just purchased 12% outright. And I really would say to someone like Mr. Guilbeault, do you imagine for 1 minute that the people that lent them the money, that are securing all of this stuff, didn't take a forecast? Didn't just say, well, is this nearly $1 billion investment going to be worth it? Let's have a look at what the oil demand is going to be. However, I mean, it's possible that it was a bad investment. It's possible that they spent nearly $1 billion and they did it because they didn't know what they were doing. And Stevie Guilbeault is the best forecaster of the economic commodity of oil and its impact on the globe. I mean, it doesn't seem likely, but it is a possibility. So let's just see if there anybody else also got this from the CBC. Strathcona Resources makes a stock and cash takeover offer for MEG Energy. So this isn't even this is a hostile takeover. They're saying we're going to give you this much money and we'll let you keep some of your stock. That's what that means. MEG said Friday that its board of directors will consider and evaluate the offer. Strathcona Resources Limited is making an unsolicited takeover offer for oil sands producer MEG Energy Corp. The value of the company is about $5.9 billion. And these guys are coming in with a buttload of money, a truckload of money. A hostile takeover is always more expensive unless the company is bottoming out. And they're calling it an unsolicited, but that's also known as a hostile takeover. That they are just coming in because this is what happens when you make your company public. You come in, now all the shareholders might get a big check. Some of them will get to keep their stock. Most of the quote unquote shareholders are going to be people that have it invested in their RRSPs and whatnot. I believe that it's important to point to the fact that not only are they trying to buy a pipeline and investing money into the energy sector, but they're doing it at a premium. So let's take a look at what some of the other people are saying about the projected consumption of oil and how it might be used or desired or the demand will be. According to Mr. Guilbeault, it'll be gone within the next 2 years. In the next 2 years, if you can imagine that. To be sure, not all analysts expect oil demands to decline. The EIA's reference case from its International Energy Outlook of 2023 has global petroleum consumption growing at a steady annual pace of 0.7% through 2050. In essence, the EIA sees no structural break in oil use, with consumption rising in line with its historical connection to global GDP growth. So this article, which comes from a think tank, and I'll leave a link, is saying that they see oil, not only are they saying they see oil attached historically to the GDP growth, but in no way, shape, or form is it going down. It's going up nearly 1% annually. And I believe that that is quite a lot of barrels of oil. But let's just see what OPEC has to say, shall we? I picked this up from a publication from OPEC, and here you can see that Chapter 3 is about oil demand. Summary: oil demand sees robust medium-term growth and reaches 120 million barrels a day by 2050, driven by the non-OECD. Oh, driven by the countries that are currently flat broke and are struggling to get forward with productivity and all the rest of that they want to come into the modern age. Now, there's an issue with that we should be talking about, because every time you hear them say, oh, we have carbon credits, they've driven to an island somewhere and they've given a buttload of money to the government that was in charge so that those guys will never improve their economy, never go industrial. That means that there are children being born right now with never the possibility that they have made an international, their forefathers have made an international agreement with people like Mark Carney to never industrialize, so that Mark Carney can have the oil pipeline in the United States and try to convince you that it's net zero. Global oil demand is projected to reach 112.3 million barrels per day in 2029, representing a strong increase of 10 million barrels per day compared to 2023. So at the same time when Stephen Guilbeault is trying to convince you that this organization somewhere in the middle of nowhere has decided that the oil consumption in the next 2 years will no longer be there, 2 or 3 years, OPEC, the world's largest oil producers, are projecting that it will go up by 10 million barrels a day by 2029. However, the regional breakdown of this medium-term expansion shows a contrasting picture between continued non-OECD demand growth and rather stagnating OECD demand. Non-OECD demand, oil demand is projected to increase by a healthy 9.6 million barrels a day between 2023 and 2029 and reach 66 million barrels a day, while OECD demand is set to oscillate around 46 million barrels a day over the same period. In the long term, now that's what their medium term, right? So that's your 5-year plan. In the long term, global oil demand is expected to increase by almost 18 million barrels a day, rising from 102.2 million barrels in 2023 to 120.1 million barrels in 2050, while non-OECD demand is projected to increase by 28 million barrels a day between 2023 and 2050. OECD demand is set to witness a decline. India drives incremental long-term demand growth. Petrochemicals, road transportation, aviation are critical for future demand growth. I'll leave a link to this entire document. And I think that we need to take a close look at that, because you might say, well, no, they're saying that it's set to decline. Well, they're investing in a lot of nuclear energy so they don't use that oil, and we're trying to get this AI up and running. What you're missing is the key component to the argument is that these countries will do it with the least technology. So they will make it as dirty as possible. A country like India or China or any of these countries that are struggling to get into the industrial age are not going to tell themselves, they're not going to allow somebody like Stephen Guilbeault to land in their country and say, no, you can't use that because it might be bad for the air. And they're like, you know what? We're tired of watching you people fly around in jets while we're over here living in grass huts. So get out of the way, please. Go away. Don't bother us anymore. Now, what you're missing here, what you're overlooking, is that by exporting the technology of Alberta, by exporting the clean way that we do it to these countries, we as Canadians can be set to ensure that this growth that the OPEC is projecting in non-OECD countries such as India, the growth that will be going there, the millions of barrels a day that is expected to come down the pipe, even in the next couple of years, can be handled properly from the outset by individuals who can put a price tag on the product. For example, we could say, you know what, we will give you a discount on our natural gas from Alberta if you simply utilize it this way, so that we know 5 years from now, when you take over and we put the price back up, that the technology we have given you will be making it as clean as possible, instead of you buying it from some country that doesn't care about how clean it is. We have the opportunity to be the stewards of that growth. We have the opportunity to be the stewards of not only the growth, but the responsibility, the economic responsibility. We could be taking the Canadian philosophy of the cleanest oil on earth and exporting that to these markets. Instead, we're leaving that in the hands of OPEC or China or Russia, and who knows how responsible that they're going to be. I certainly don't. Maybe they do, maybe they will, maybe they won't. What I can say with absolute certainty is that they in no way, shape, or form are stopping. There's no talk in Qatar about turning off the pipes for the environment. There's no discussion that I've been able to read from this OPEC paper that's saying, no, we're going to turn the pipes off. And also they are projecting to be able to supply these extra barrels of oil well into 2050, when Canada is trying to have their grid go fairly clean by 2050. So we could be taking this product, this industry, this technology, and giving it to other countries who would then utilize our technology, because we're giving them the oil at a discount for a couple of years while they get the process up and running, saving them millions or billions of dollars and generating their economy, generating growth, making them come out of the poverty that they've been in for centuries. So on top of making their air the cleanest and being the environmental stewards, we are now helping this country get out of poverty and achieve a level of prosperity that they have never to it understood. And all that stands in the way is the Liberal Party, Stephen Guilbeault, and the fanatical, narrow-minded approach of all the far-left ecomaniacs. Yeah, that's a great deal. This sounds like a brilliant way to solve the problem. We will simply never, ever touch it, and we will allow people to sell dirty oil to these countries, because what they really care about is getting out of poverty. And there will be nobody there to ensure that it's looked after. And our tiny little market might not be producing any petroleum, certainly, but against the backdrop of millions, hundreds of millions of people spewing the oil out, unfettered, with no care for the cleanliness of it, what good are we really doing? It's kind of like telling yourself that you're in the non-smoking section of a restaurant, but there's no walls between you and the smoking area. Well, You let me know if you think I'm being reasonable. I'm supposed to remind you to like, share, comment, subscribe. I really kind of want to have the subscribers, so if you could, could subscribe to the channel and share it with your friends. I can take the heat, so don't worry about sharing it with people that might not necessarily concur with our approach to this. I think it's important that we look at it from a grander scale, a bigger scale, that we look at the problem seriously instead of getting lost in our hatred and getting lost in our fanaticism, instead of having a narrow-minded and a narrow view, and people like Stephen Guilbeault and the current environment minister out of Toronto, and even Mark Carney, who believes that we should also leave the oil in the ground. All of these individuals have no understanding or concept of just how far the reach of our clean technology could go to stewarding in, by 2050, a world that is pristine all over and everybody's getting fed. I'm going to wrap here. I want to thank you for listening. I'll talk to you next time.